to take a second to remind everybody that we are recording today's session. I believe that was in the email that was sent out to everyone as well. So just so you're aware, we will be recording this session, and that's so we're able to access this information later on. Just want to double check, is my presentation showing for everybody?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I gave me a little warning, so just wanted to double check. We'll go ahead and get started. We just have a couple of housekeeping rules here up at the front. For this session in particular, all guests will be muted to start. However, we will have some Q&A slides incrementally throughout the presentation. So if you would like to ask your question verbally, we ask that you please raise your hand during that Q&A slide, and one of the panelists can unmute you to ask your question. Additionally, you can also submit questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A function of this. And both the raise your hand and Q&A buttons should be there at the bottom of your screen. You can select the Q&A button to submit questions at any time. You do have the option to submit anonymously as well, if you'd like to do that. And we will address all questions throughout the presentation and afterwards. If it turns out that a question is a little long or it requires more feedback, we will follow up on all questions. So please feel free to submit a question no matter how complicated it might seem. We will either address it during the presentation or in the follow-up correspondence afterwards. The chat button is also available. That's to communicate to all of the panelists. We're not facilitating questions through that chat function. It's really to just let us know if you're having any issues with the webinar or something along those lines. So for questions, please use that Q&A button or feel free to raise your hand. The presentation slides will also be provided after the presentation. And as we mentioned, the meeting recording will also be provided on the Economic Development Department's webpage. I believe it's their YouTube page. And last but not least, we will have a follow-up survey at the end of the presentation. If you have time, it should pop up whenever we conclude the webinar. If you need to get to another session or need to get on with your day, we will also send this out via email as well. So feel free to respond to that survey through either manner. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. So today's session, this is the commercial development process from start to finish. And this is being presented by a few of us here in the Development Services Department within the City of Austin. Namely, here on the webinar today is the development process team, which includes myself, Cole Hubbard, and we also have Sandra Castillo and Natalia Rodriguez, and we three make up the development process team. So just a quick agenda. These are some of the topics we're going to cover today. We'll start by talking about our team very briefly, just so everyone on the call understands a little better what our team does and how we work with small business owners. And then we'll dive into the commercial development process. So we'll talk about work that's exempt from permits, and then we'll move on to the beginning of the process. So starting with zoning, subdivision, moving on into site plan and site plan exemptions, commercial building review, permitting, inspections, and certificate of occupancy. While this looks like a lot of information, rest at ease, we will be going into each of these one by one. We'll answer some basic questions on definitions, and we'll provide you some great resources along the way. So that way you're equipped to understand this process a little better. But first, let's start with talking about the development process team. Again, that's myself, Natalia, and Sandra. And our team is newer to the Development Services Department, and we assist homeowners and small businesses as they go through the development process. So some of the more specific services that we provide, we are an optional support for small business owners as they navigate anything from the review process, permitting, inspections. You can also feel free to engage with our team before submitting anything at all to our department. We can answer some high-level questions about the process and what you can kind of expect whenever you're trying to build something on your property. So we can provide that high-level process information about developing in Austin. We also offer our team as a single point of contact for the duration of your project. We've heard from some customers that they walk away with a laundry list of contacts and they're not sure who to ask which question. You can always feel free to ask our team those questions. And if we are not the correct team that can best answer that question, we will connect you with the right resource every step of the way. So just feel free to reach out to our team. Our customers, as we mentioned, are typically those homeowners or small business owners. It's those that are unfamiliar with the development process. And this may or may not be the first or second time that you're submitting a development application and going through the development process yourself. So this is all just to say that our customers typically are new to this, and our team is equipped to explain the process in a manner that's understandable and hopefully a little more bite-sized. And for the more complicated projects, we are here to assist and connect you with the folks in our department that can best assist you. So just wanted to plug our team's services, as everyone on the call, I believe, is a small business or connected to a small business in some manner. So we provide our services both by phone and by email. So that's 512-974-1040, or our team email is developmentprocessteam@austintexas.gov. We provide this support in both English and Spanish, so feel free to shoot any questions our way. But with that being said, let's dive into the commercial development process. As I mentioned, we're going to start with that work exempt from permits. So basically what this means is we do have specific projects that are completely exempt from permitting, and you would not have to pay any fees to our department in order to conduct some of this work. So I've included just a few examples here. As you can see, it's fences not over 7 feet high, provided it's not located within the flood hazard area. Also some finish work such as painting or carpeting or cabinets. And also threw in this one, as this is another common one that we see, is that one-story detached accessory structure. And they give a few examples of what those could be, provided the floor area is not more than 120 square feet and you're not located in the flood hazard area. So basically, in order for your project to be exempt from permits, your full scope of work must be listed. So what do we mean by that? If I'm using a fictional example, we'll say I'm opening a small business called Cole's Coffee, and all I want to do is build this fence here, and I'm not going to make it over 7 feet high, and I know I'm not located within the flood hazard area. If that's all I'm doing, then I don't need any kind of approval basically from the city. I can go ahead and build that fence myself, or I can hire a contractor to do that on my behalf. But essentially the permitting, there is not a permit that's required. However, if I, the small business owner of Cole's Coffee, am building this fence and I'm pouring some concrete somewhere, well, now we're getting into my full scope of work is not completely listed here, because now I'm starting to exceed exactly what's listed. You can also mix and match these. So let's say if I'm building a fence that meets this specification and I'm doing some finish work, you're still exempt from permits. But if your exact project is not listed out here, then it would not be eligible to be exempt from those permits. Now, I'm not going to dive into this today just for the sake of time. And again, the presentation slides will be provided afterwards, so you'll have all of these resources available to you. But we do have a work exempt from permits page. And this will list everything that's exempt from permitting requirements. It does have both commercial and residential sections. So just be sure, if this is for your small business, to make sure that you're looking at that commercial section. It's about halfway down the page. But if your scope of work is not listed here in full, then that's whenever we would go into the full commercial development process. Now, this is the process in visual form. We tried to into these different sections, starting with zoning, subdivision, site plan, commercial building, moving down here to permitting, inspections, and certificate of occupancy. Now, not every project will follow this process exactly. There are some specific cases that jump to a certain step. We'll be sure to cover those in today's presentation, but for the sake of covering all of our bases, we're going to go ahead and start right here at the beginning in the zoning step, and we'll go ahead and get started. So for zoning, what is zoning? Zoning establishes the types of land uses on a parcel of land within the full or limited purpose jurisdiction of the city of Austin. And what zoning aims to do is to create compatible land uses and also to set proper design and construction standards. So really zoning is what we're starting out with. It basically designates what can or cannot be built on the property. It has a lot of other things built in, but this is really square one on determining what can be built on a property. So the million-dollar question is, how do I determine my zoning? So if you're looking at your current property or one that you're considering buying or leasing, we do have this great free tool called Property Profile. The link is located here at the bottom. And for today, I am going to show how to use this tool in order to look up your zoning. So whenever you first open Property Profile, it will pull up this GIS map, which you can drag. And it has a lot of great functionality within this tool. You can do some amazing things, a lot of great information in here. And as I mentioned, just for today's purpose, I'm just looking up the zoning, but did also want to call out that tomorrow we're having another session called What to Know Before You Buy or Lease, where we'll do a more in-depth demonstration of this tool. So if you haven't signed up already, please feel free to do that. But for today's demonstration, I'm going to click here in the top left on address search. And I just have a sample address that I'm looking to open my fantastic coffee shop at, Cole's Coffee. So you would put in the address and then hit submit, and it should pull up the property in our system. Just a quick tip for using this. We do encourage you, if you are inputting the address, we encourage our customers to start typing and let it populate and then select it from the drop-down list. It's just a little cleaner. So using this example of 2200 Manor Road, I can see the address right here in the top left. I can also see the jurisdiction is Austin full purpose. And then right underneath, we have our zoning string. So you can see here it's CS-MU-V-NP. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, we'll dive into that in just a minute. But want to call out that this very first set of letters right here, CS, that is what is called our base zoning. So that's going to really be a big player on what kind of business can exist on this property or not. And these others here either add or remove restrictions. Now, well, as I mentioned, we'll get into that in just a second. So that's how we look up our zoning. If we have no idea what the zoning is, I would recommend you use Property Profile. Very easy to use. You can find your zoning in just a few seconds. So these are some additional zoning resources. We're going to take a look at this zoning descriptions link. And so this is sort of like a cheat sheet, basically, of what the different zoning districts are. If you're unsure what CS stands for, as you can see right here, it stands for General Commercial Services. Or if I wanted to get a little more information about this string of letters right here, we'll highlight MU in particular. You can scroll right down here to the bottom. And as you can see, we have MU, and it gives a little bit more of a definition and what you can do with that property, essentially. So we're not going to dive through that entire zoning string just for sake of time, but just wanted to call out that we do have this available. Also, another great resource we have in our presentation today is the actual code section with the zoning and the uses. So I won't dive into this today because it's a little more technical in nature, but did want to call out that we provide a link to the land development code that calls out the different base zoning districts, and it gives you all of the more technical information about that property. So it gives you the impervious coverage limit. It will talk about minimum lot size. It goes into a lot of the specifics for each zoning. So just know that you'll have this resource available after the presentation. I did also want to call out this zoning permitted use chart. So I will actually bring that one up today. So this is something we commonly see with small businesses in particular. Zoning is a very important feature of your property. Namely for this right down here, as you can see, we have a chart that specifically calls out different commercial uses and cross-references it with the different zoning types. So if we're going back to my example, if you'll recall this base zoning here, CS, so that's what I'm going to use. And as you can see on the pink bar up here, I'm going to find CS, and everything that says P is permitted. So these are all of the different business types that are permitted under CS. So if I'm, in particular, I'm looking at a carriage stable, Cole's carriage stable, unfortunately would not happen on this property as it's not permitted. So definitely a great resource, especially if you haven't quite property yet. It's great to cross-reference your zoning with this permitted use chart, as it will save you a lot of headache, as it's so much easier to find a property that has a compatible zoning as opposed to trying to go through a rezoning process. It takes a lot more time and fees to go through that. So that's available to you as well. And we also, of course, have staff that can answer some zoning questions. So provided the link here to our development assistance page. This links to the Development Assistance Center page and gives some contact information for the staff within that specific group. And they can certainly walk you through if you have a more technical zoning question, or you're confused about what exactly your zoning string allows or doesn't allow for your small business. We do have staff specifically that can answer those types of questions. So just know that we provide that support as well if you're having zoning questions in particular. So let's say for the argument's sake, I'm opening Cole's Coffee. I see that my zoning works with my intended business use. I can now move on to the subdivision step. So what is a subdivision? A subdivision is required when a property owner within the full purpose or the extraterritorial jurisdiction, or ETJ, divides a tract of land into two or more parts. Subdivision also comes into play whenever we are combining legal lots or portions of lots into new lots by re-subdivision. Now, what the heck does all of that mean? Basically, the re-subdivision step comes into play whenever we're trying to determine if a property has legal lot lines. So this is important because if I'm opening Cole's Coffee and I'm opening my business on a lot that is not a legal lot, well, now I have to go through this subdivision process in order to make that lot, make that a legal lot. We do have some ways of confirming that you are working with a legal lot or not. And we do have those listed out here. So essentially, which sites are exempt from the subdivision process? Those are those legal lots. And the legal lot status can be verified in 3 different ways. We won't demo this today just because it takes a little bit of time. And I also want to preface with this particular issue is more uncommon than common, but we do want to cover it today because we do see some businesses have to go through this process. So it's always better to do your due diligence and make sure that you're buying or leasing a legal lot. Otherwise, you'll have to go through this subdivision process. So here are some quick ways on how to determine a legal lot. Again, you don't have to memorize this. We'll send it afterwards. But you can use that property profile tool that we just showed earlier. Essentially, you would just follow these steps exactly. As I mentioned, there's a lot of great functionality within that online tool. But essentially, we're looking for a recorded lot or subdivision layer within that property. This would indicate that the lot has a recorded subdivision and it is, in fact, a legal lot. It does happen often that a property may not have this specific layer. So they don't have, property profile does not show a recorded subdivision for the property. That's when we would move on to step 2, which is looking through our ABC public search. Another great tool that our customers use quite often. I won't be demoing that today, but again, for tomorrow's presentation, we will have a demo of ABC. So I encourage you to join to see a more in-depth demo of that. But we can also use the ABC public search to see if there has been a recorded land status determination. ABC is used to look at the permit history of a property, and you can see pending applications as well. But specifically on this step, we are looking to see if a land status determination happened in the past. So we would follow these steps exactly, and we're looking for this DA file, specifically that land status determination, and it should say approved. Now, let's say for Cole's Coffee, I'm looking at a lot. I can't find the recorded subdivision in the property profile. I've now used ABC and I cannot find this land status determination in the permit history. That's when we move on to step 3. If those 2 steps don't yield any results, you can always contact staff to verify if the lot that you're dealing with is a legal lot or not. So we do have subdivision review staff specifically. The link to their website will be provided at the end of the presentation, but did want to call out that the email for that group is dsd_subdivision_review@austintexas.gov. And essentially this staff can confirm if the property is a legal lot. And if it's not, then they will provide next steps. As I mentioned, it's a little more uncommon than common, but if this does happen to come up for you and the property you're looking at specifically, feel free to let us know and we can guide you through these steps a little more in depth. So those are the first 2 steps of the development process. So we're going to take a quick Q&A break. So if you'd like, submit questions using that Q&A button, or feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you. If there aren't any questions at this time, then we can just go ahead and push forward. As I mentioned, just feel free to submit questions at any time if something comes up. All right, so keeping with our process.
Oh, wait, sorry. We have a question from Mike, and he's asking, how do you determine what use you are?
As in the business use, or, well, let me pull that up again. So we do have, on this permitted use chart, we do have these specific, we have these different commercial uses. It does happen on occasion where someone has, let's say, a very specific business type and it doesn't quite fit quite right in one of these categories. If that's the case, we would recommend that you reach out to the development assistance staff. This group right here, they can kind of guide you through. If it doesn't neatly fit into one of those categories, it does happen. Feel free to reach out to staff and they can guide you through what your specific use would be.
And Mike, I would add that the link that Cole has there about the code section with uses, that gives the whole list of the different uses the city of Austin has, and it'll give a description. So you can actually read through that and figure out what use is specific to your use that you're wanting to do, or the building already has, or anything like that.
Yeah, good point, Sally. Thank you.
Looks like we're good right now. Cole, you could move forward.
All right, well, then we'll say for Cole's copy, I verified that zoning works. I have verified that I'm working with a legal lot. I can move forward to this site plan and site plan exemption step in the commercial development process. So what is a site plan? A site plan establishes how the land of a lot will be used. So residential, commercial, industrial, and it looks at everything that is happening on the lot horizontally as opposed to vertically. What do we mean by that? Essentially, a site plan is looking at everything that's happening on the lot as a whole. It doesn't necessarily hone in too much on the building quite yet. That's a different step. Rather, it's looking at the building layout. So how much of the property does the building occupy? They're also looking at other features on the lot, such as parking lots, driveways, roadway access. Environmental features are also considered, like trees and landscaping. They're taking a look at that impervious coverage as well. So just to illustrate this point, I wanted to just show a sample site plan. So as you can see, we're showing a lot that's, off of ABC Road. As you can see, we have our roadway access right here, also XYZ Street. This site plan shows the parking. Here's our main building here. So this site plan is actually for a demolition of this portion of the building in particular. But as you can see, the site plan shows everything that's happening on the lot. It's kind of hard to read, but this calls out a pecan tree in particular on the property, shows its root zone. So just to show that a site plan, while this is the specific construction that's happening on the property, a site plan takes a look at everything. So a site plan will look at if you're opening a new business, they make sure you have enough parking. They'll make sure enough impervious coverage. This is where all of that gets checked essentially on this step. So there are two different ways to get a site plan reviewed. We have a site plan exemption and a site plan. I'm going to discuss the differences between these two options. As the name sort of implies, a site plan exemption means that you are exempt from doing this full site plan. So we'll go over the differences line by line. The process for an exemption is typically 1 to 2 months. So it can vary just depending on the project, but a full site plan is typically over a year at least, just so it depends. But costs for the exemption are typically just north of $200 right now. And costs for a full site plan are usually over $1,000, if not several $1,000s. So the cost is definitely a major difference between these two. So in order to qualify for a site plan exemption, a project does have to meet certain eligibility. So I've listed 3 of the big ones here in particular, namely the 1,000 square feet of work or less. Also the 3,000 square feet limits of construction or less. Now, what does that mean? What are the limits of construction? If we're using our site plan example, if I'm just doing this, basically this has to be 1,000 square feet or less of work. And the total area of construction has to be less than 3,000 square feet. So if I'm also adding little bathroom right here, it looks like I'll still be okay because the limits of construction won't be increased. So it's really looking at how much of the total lot is being affected. It has to be less than 3,000 square feet. And also the foundation and layout of the shell must remain the same. There are a few other requirements in particular, but these are the 3 big ones. And of course, all exemption ineligible projects must go through that full site plan. And these two review types do have different groups. So if you had questions about the site plan exemption, that would be this DSD-DAC at austintexas.gov email. Or if you know your project's above 1,000 square feet, or you just know that it's not eligible, you can go ahead and reach out to land use review at austintexas.gov if you wanted to understand that site plan a little more specifically. So we do include the link here for the land use review page. For exemptions, site plan exemptions, as I mentioned, the questions can be sent to that DSD-DAC email. This is also the same group that addresses zoning questions. So if you have questions about your business use or if a particular zoning will work for you, this is the same group that answers those questions. So kind of a one-stop shop here at the beginning of the process. And we also have a different email here for when you're ready to submit. And similar for site plan, questions can be sent to that land use review email, and a different email here for when you're actually ready to submit a site plan. So that's kind of the quick overview of site plans in particular. We're now going to dive here into commercial building review. So for using my fake business again, if I've now submitted a site plan or site plan exemption and it has been approved, I can now move on to the commercial building review step. It is a requirement that this either be in review or approved before you can move on to this step. So just know that those two do follow a very specific order. So what is commercial building review? As opposed to that horizontal review that we were looking at in land use review, commercial building reviews the vertical or the actual structures that are being constructed. So we're now honing in just on the proposed construction on the property. So there are two different ways to get commercial building plans reviewed. We have our standard commercial review and we have our expedited commercial review. I want to discuss the differences between these two as you will have both available to you. The standard commercial review follows that standard review style review. So what we mean by that is that, let's say for Cole's Coffee, I am doing a bathroom remodel and I am doing an interior remodel to my main, the main portion of my building. So my hired professional, my architect or my engineer would submit plans showing that scope of work. This would then be reviewed by a commercial building reviewer. And depending on if there's electrical work, plumbing work, it would go to those corresponding reviewers as well. But essentially, staff would come together and issue rejection comments. Now, but that doesn't mean my plans are rejected outright. It's not the city saying that I can't build that. It just means that certain parts of my plan don't exactly meet the land development code exactly. So I need to get back with my architect or my engineer, redraw those plans, and then I resubmit, and that would start the next cycle. So that's what we mean by the cycle review. It's that back and forth between staff. Expedited review, on the other hand, is more of a work session between city review staff and those hired design professionals. So it would be more akin to sitting down with staff, with the plans. They open the plans together, and it's more of a work session. So you're actually editing those plans during that joint work session. For standard commercial review, those review times really depend on your project scope. For a new construction, it takes longer to review that as opposed to something more simple like replacing one small part of your building. The review time just depends on how much you're actually doing. Versus expedited, the review times depends on available appointments. So if expedited has no one in line, no one waiting for a review, then you could be seen next day. If they're backed up, up to 3 months, it would be 3 months before your plans would be reviewed. So just a different style of waiting on your plans to be approved. And similar with the fees, Fees for standard commercial depend on that project scope. So more fees for new construction versus something very simple. It's based upon square footage, or there's an element of the fees that are based upon square footage, and versus expedited, which is based on that hourly rate. So just depends how long it takes to get those plans approved. That's how much the fee will be. I will say for most small businesses that we see, they find that it's typically a little quicker and possibly a little cheaper in terms of fees to go through standard commercial review, but that's completely up to you. It's honestly a preference. Both review styles adhere to the same codes and criteria, so it's not a different review, it's just a different review style. And so I did also want to demo this commercial review resources page, which I'll get to in just a second, which includes this interactive application guide. So let me go ahead and open that. So this is the commercial plan review page. It's got a lot of great information on here. As you can see, it's pretty long with all of these different drop downs. A lot of these are more FYIs, but I specifically wanted to call out right here at the top, there's this section called new construction. So within this section in particular, you'll see here, we have those estimated review times. So for new construction, they're estimating about 25 business days versus we get all the way down to these quick turnaround projects that are typically reviewed same day. So it really depends on the project scope and what you're planning to do on how quickly those get back to you. But I wanted to call out that both expedited and standard commercial use the same commercial building application. So if you were taking a crack at filling this out, we do understand that there are a lot of fields, green building standards required, floodplain, 2021 weather event, that you may or may not know what it's even asking for. We developed this interactive guide to the commercial building application. And it essentially goes field by field and explains what exactly we're looking for. So you can see it's got some great descriptions on what exactly staff is asking for. Some of these have some interactive videos as well, showing you exactly how to use the tools. So just know that we have this resource available if you are filling out this application on your own. Let's see, presentation. So that's provided in the resources as well, that commercial review page. And we do encourage any small business to consult with commercial review prior to doing any work. This is really from a sense of understanding the requirements and the fees that will be associated with your specific project. Just a good idea to check with staff to see how feasible your project is or how many hoops you'll have to jump through essentially. And also wanted to call out, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but there is an expectation on this step for hiring a design professional. That's specific to commercial review. That is not the same for residential, but for commercial review, in order to submit building plans, they have to be sealed by an architect or an engineer. So just a little bit of expectation setting. There will be fees not associated with our department, but just in general for hiring those design professionals. Our office cannot recommend design professionals, unfortunately. We're gonna take a quick pause here. We just talked about site plan and commercial building plan review. Quick pause for questions if anyone wants to raise their hand or submit something in the Q&A. I'll wait just a few seconds. If not, we can go ahead and keep going. Alrighty, we'll go ahead and push forward. So for going back to my example, I have verified Cole's Coffee is good to go as zoning, I'm working with a legal lot. I have that approved site plan. which allowed me to submit to commercial building. And once those are approved, that's when we move into the permitting phase. This is a short step. Well, typically it's a very short step. Really what we're doing in this step is once building plans are reviewed and approved, that's when our permits need to be linked, activated, and paid for. That's done through our ABC portal. Just one way our department is operating right now, we are taking all fees through the ABC portal. So you will have made an account hypothetically much earlier in this process. But essentially we're now paying for the permits that are generated. So back to my example, if Cole's Coffee is renovating the interior, let's say I'm doing some electrical work as well, I would then be issued a building permit and an electrical permit. These now need to be activated and paid for, and this essentially clears them so I can now call inspections on them. So also wanted to call out that there are cases where projects are eligible for a standard trade permit. What we mean by trade permit is an electrical permit, a plumbing permit, or a mechanical permit. So mechanical permits are typically associated with HVAC systems, air conditioning. So if your scope of work is limited to one single trade, so if I'm only doing plumbing work in my hypothetical coffee shop, then I could potentially apply for one of these standalone trade permits. What this would essentially do is jump me right ahead to this phase right here. However, I want to call out that essentially my business has to kind of be established at this point. So I can't be starting a new business and say I'm only doing plumbing work, because as you'll recall, we have to verify the zoning works with your new business use. We need to make sure that's a legal plot. So there's a few other things that need to happen. But if I'm an established business, I know I'm only going to work with that one trade. Just know that we do have those standalone trade permit applications as well. Additionally, if you identify that there are some expired permits on your property, you do have the ability to reactivate those if you would like to continue the work on those permits. For active permits, you can also extend or withdraw them. So just one other thing to note about permits. So for Cole's Coffee, I was issued that building permit and the electrical permit. Both of those permits have a life of 180 days. So that means they expire on the 181st day. So that's what we mean when we're talking about expired permits. There are two different ways keeping a permit active. One is calling inspections, which we'll get to in just a second. The other one is using this form to extend the permit. So just know that's available to you. If I, as the small business owner, am conducting my work and it's just taking a little longer than I expected, and I don't think I'll be able to call that next inspection in time, you can submit this form to extend the life of your permit. Or if I know I don't want to do this work anymore, I can also withdraw it. If you wanted to search for permit history on either your current property or a property you're thinking about purchasing, just know that you can look through that on the ABC public search, as we mentioned earlier. And I also dropped a link here for this service center page. So this will give you a little more information on how to pay for permits, but it also has links to the applications for those standalone trade permits. It's also got the link to the form where you can reactivate permits, extend them, or withdraw them. So this is kind of a one-stop shop page for all of this information. So for Cole's Coffee, I've now paid for my permits. That means I'm ready to go to the inspections phase. So what are inspections? Inspections occur to verify that the proposed project is being built according to the previously approved plans. So all the inspections phase is really doing is making sure that I'm building according to what was determined here and here. So those approved plans that I got earlier, I can now start building once I'm in the inspections phase, but essentially inspectors are coming to verify that I'm building according to those plans. So once those permits are paid for and activated, inspections phase can begin. Questions about construction itself are best answered by your hired contractor. Just wanted to call out that also for the commercial development process for trade permits. So again, those electrical permits, plumbing permits, you do have to hire a licensed professional to conduct that work. So even if I know it's something that I can do, I have to have a licensed electrician assigned to my electrical permit. That's just how commercial inspections works. So just know that that's another built-in cost that's not necessarily associated with our department, but it is an expectation that you have to hire that licensed tradesperson before you can move forward. So, but the questions about construction itself, best answered by those hired contractors, but questions related to the inspections order of process cannot be answered by your assigned inspector. So we do have another link here for our building inspections page. This has a lot of great resources on it. It's got the Find My Inspector tool. Essentially, you just put in your address and it provides all of the lists of assigned inspectors to your property. It divides it up by residential and commercial, but it provides their name and their contact information. So if you ever need to reach out to your inspector, that's a great tool for locating if you're not sure who it is that you're working with. They include a top 10 tips for successful inspection, info on how to schedule an inspection. They also include these inspections flow charts if you're interested, you know, if I'm only doing that one trade permit, let's say, so I only want to know the plumbing, like a plumbing permit flow chart. We do have that specifically for commercial. It's split out into building, electrical, plumbing, and mechanical. So you can see the full process if you're interested. And we also have new policies and procedures. One other thing I wanted to call out, this is sometimes not widely known, but inspections does require multiple inspections. So there's actually a very first, and this is illustrated through these flowcharts a little better, but there's an initial inspection where your inspector will come out, they'll talk about the project and they'll kind of set expectations for what they're looking for in their specific inspections. And depending on the project scope, so if I'm building a brand new building, I'm going to have a lot of inspections along the way. That's just to make sure that the building is completely built to code. So there's multiple inspections involved. If it's something a little more simple, it could be as few as 2 inspections. It really just depends on that scope of work. But just to set that expectation, it's I don't believe ever just one and done inspection. I might be wrong on that, but I haven't seen one where it's literally just one inspection and then you're done. But we encourage you, if you have questions about the inspections order process specifically, work with your assigned inspector identified through this Find My Inspector tool. So for Cole's Coffee, let's say I've activated and paid for those permits. I've now called all of my inspections, including it has to end with the final inspection on your building permit, or if you have a standalone trade permit, the final on that trade permit. Once you call that final, we can now move on to the certificate of occupancy. So this is kind of the finish line here. So what is a certificate of occupancy? Our office often abbreviates this to CO. So if you hear CO, that's what we're referencing. This is a document provided by the city that proves that a structure is habitable based upon its legal use and type of property, and that it meets all housing and building codes. So essentially, this is just a document that shows you've gone through all of the reviews, all of the inspections, you're good to go. So a CO is provided upon a successful final inspection. There's a couple of ways to request your CO, or if you want to request an old CO, we have this email here, DSD Certificate of Occupancy at austintexas.gov, or also be aware that COs that are issued after August 9th, 2019 are publicly available through that ABC portal. So if you wanted to just access your own CO for a project you completed within the last couple of years, you're absolutely able to do that as well. As I mentioned, so here's kind of our resources page whenever we send out these slides. If you don't want to dig through all of the slides specifically, you can kind of find this table of contents of sorts. I mentioned where exactly the link is mentioned. So if you, let's say, start a project and you're on zoning, well, you can look at all of these zoning resources right here, just for y'all's use later. Did also want to call out again that we have a great presentation tomorrow on what to know before you buy or lease. This discusses the red flags of the development process before you actually buy or lease a property. So this is kind of based upon what we've seen, sort of the woes of a small commercial development in our time here with DSD. So we'll cover some topics that we talked about today, albeit not in as much detail, but we'll talk about zoning, land use, commercial building, and permits. But we'll also demo those free interactive tools, so property profile, ABC. Great session for tomorrow. It's the same time from 2 to 3. So I believe that's on the EDD page if you want to register for that. And our presentations will also be made available on our website, austintexas.gov/development process team. And with that, that's what we have today. So I appreciate everyone sticking with me. But if you have any remaining questions, feel free to go ahead and use the Q&A or raise your hand. If there are any follow-up questions or you don't feel comfortable submitting it in one of those two ways, feel free to email our team, development process team at austintexas.gov. We are, even if you don't have questions, we are very excited to be presenting to you all today. Our team is specifically made to assist small businesses through this process, so please utilize us, essentially. We will be sending a follow-up email with the slides, as well as, if there's any questions that are submitted, we can answer those as well. And again, that meeting recording will be provided by EDD. Seeing hands for Q&A at this time. So I guess at this time, we'll go ahead and move forward to the end of the presentation survey. Of course, if someone does have a question, feel free. That's what this time is for, but if we can, I don't know if we can send that out right now, or do I need to?
When we end the meeting, the survey will appear automatically within your Zoom tool. If you do accidentally close out before responding to our survey, you will receive an email within 24 hours that also has that link, and we very much appreciate your feedback.
Great. So I guess with that being said, if there are no questions, yeah, we'll send out that survey afterwards. And we thank you so much for joining us today. We hope the presentation was useful. Again, please send us any questions or requests you might have. Our team is here to help.
And I'll also add that if you're looking to either purchase a property or lease a property, or looking at wanting to look at a specific address, feel free to contact our team and we can consult you through this process and kind of give you some up-to-date information as far as what to expect for things. So please reach out to our team before starting your process, just to make sure that you're aware of any hiccups as you move through this process. But thank you so much again for joining us today.